Good morning. My name is Barbara Fuller, and as chair of the board, I welcome you to this July 19th, 2022 working session of the Washtenaw County Board of Road Commissioners. Our communications manager, Emily Kaiser, will describe how our meetings operate, how to access the agenda packet, and how people may participate remotely. Emily.
Thanks, Commissioner. There are multiple ways to make public comment today during the meeting, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. If you're here in person and would like to make public comment, please fill out the sign-in sheet now. If you're joining us virtually, we'll ask that you virtually raise your hand at the appropriate time in the agenda. If you are joining us virtually, the chat feature on this Zoom meeting is available only as technical support for users on their computer or smartphone. If you're experiencing technical issues with audio or video during the meeting, please submit a comment in the chat feature and I will help you troubleshoot. If you're a staff member experiencing issues, please contact the IT help desk for assistance. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded. A link to the video recording will be posted to wcroads.org in the coming days. There are printed copies of today's working session agenda on the table here, and it's also posted on wcroads.org. There's a link available in the chat if you're joining us from your computer or smartphone. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Emily. I now call this meeting to order and ask if Emily would please call the roll.
Chair Barb Fuller.
Present.
Vice Chair Rod Green.
Here.
Commissioner Douglas Fuller has an excused absence. Commissioner Gloria Yamas also has an excused absence. I do want to note, though, she is listening in virtually. And then Commissioner Joanne McCollum.
Present.
In addition, we have the following directors in attendance: Managing Director Cheryl Siddle, Director of Engineer, County Highway Engineer Matt McDonnell, who is here virtually, Director of Operations Adam Lape, Director of Finance and IT Dan Ackerman.
Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is public participation. This is the time set aside on the agenda to receive comments from the public. This is not intended to be a period for dialogue. Each person will be allotted 3 minutes to address the board. Emily will explain how people may be recognized to offer comments to the board. Emily?
Thanks again. So since this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and virtual attendees, we'll take turns between those attending in person and those attending virtually. For virtual attendees, we ask that you virtually raise your hand now. If you're viewing the meeting on your computer, first make sure to click Join Audio. You can then raise your hand by clicking the Participants or Reactions button at the bottom of your screen and then the Raise Hand button. If you dialed into the meeting from your touch-tone phone, raise your hand by dialing *9. I will unmute virtual participants with raised hands one at a time. I will announce your username or the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. Please share your name and address before beginning your comments. For in-person attendees, we will start with those of you who've signed up on the sign-in sheet as you walked in. If you didn't sign in, you're still welcome to make comment. I'll notify you when it is your turn. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to share their comments with the board.
All right. Emily, do we have anyone who has signed in or who is waiting to speak virtually?
At this time, we don't have anybody on the sign-in and no raised hands.
Thank you very much. We will move right ahead. Cheryl, if you want to take over at this point and lead us into the next item, which is our budget review.
Absolutely. Well, historically, July working session is our second quarter budget review. Needless to say, we have a lot to discuss this year, although we are still in pretty good shape. This has been a bit of a crazy year between primarily the inflation that everybody is experiencing and some of the supply chain issues as well. So I'll be happy to hand it over to Dan and we'll go through at least a highlight and hopefully answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Ackerman.
Good morning.
Yes, and I believe we all had it in our mailboxes as well. Thank you.
Feel free. If anything comes up. We'll gladly answer. All right, we'll go on. So where's unfortunately, when you talk I don't know if everybody saw the latest numbers. Inflation for June of 2022, the annual inflation rate was 9.1%.
Hello, Washtenaw County
I'll
Road
say that
Commission, this is
again.
Erin.
Oh, I'll say that again, 9.1%, which is the highest we've seen in about 40 years, and was the largest annual rate since November of 1981. And I'm sure for those of us that remember the early 80s, some challenging times, late 70s, energy crisis, and so on. So as Cheryl mentioned, definitely some challenging times. So we have to acknowledge that and, talk about it a little bit and be mindful of it as we're looking at projections, not only for this year, but, I wish I had a crystal ball to see what inflation would do in the next few months, the next few years. It's anyone's guess, really, where that could go. But, as of now, when we look at things, it does have an impact. The good news is with the Michigan Transportation Funds, so far that impact appears to be minimal. Through 5 months of this year compared to last year, it's up about 4%, the receipts from the gas tax license and registration fees. So that certainly is trending pretty well. We of course follow the MDOT projections, and then we usually dial it back slightly. So we don't exactly use their projections, but close. And in May, they released new projections, and they're very similar to the other projections from February and from the previous year. As a matter of fact, I believe they adjusted it up a little bit. So, they seem to be, at least MDOT and their economists seem to be somewhat optimistic that either inflation will steady at some point, or the impact of the inflation we're seeing doesn't seem to be influencing the Michigan Transportation Funds as much as I guess I would think. I guess people are still buying vehicles. I've heard the price of a new vehicle is astronomical right now, so maybe less are buying it, but the price is higher, so therefore it's not impacting the gas tax as much. Obviously, we're still in the pandemic, but obviously things have relaxed a little bit, and the numbers are such that people are kind of out and about and traveling more. So certainly that doesn't seem to be as influenced as much either. So that's definitely the good news, that our main source of revenue, the Michigan Transportation Funds, they don't seem to be adversely impacted at this time. Again, obviously, as we say all the time, we monitor it closely to make sure that there aren't any sudden changes. And certainly we shared with you from month to month, there's some ebbs and flows as far as increases and decreases, but obviously we look at the 12 months there. Yes.
So Dan, help me remember, what's the lag time when we see these kinds of changes in the economy?
Yeah.
Seems like in the past you've said things look okay now, but it catches up with us, 3 months, 6 months? What's the usual?
Well, there is a lag time. Maybe you're referring to the lag time when the money is actually collected and then dispersed.
Mhm.
There's usually about a 2-month lag.
2 months, okay.
Right. So you're right. I mean, if something happened in May, July is when you would receive the May
MTF, yeah.
revenues. So right, there is a bit of a lag to it, but I don't see that necessarily would change our thinking too much as far as the information we've been receiving and so on. So
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, it is something to consider.
Dan, if they were to, like, for example, pause there's been discussion about a gas tax holiday. That would be something that, to Dan's point, we would be experiencing that lag.
Yeah.
You'd see it in that, that 2-month time frame, and then for whatever period of time. But thankfully, there's been no further discussion about that gas tax holiday. And people seem to be driving despite even when gas was at $5 a gallon, it seemed like people were still driving. And we are a consumption tax, so ours is still per gallon. It doesn't matter what the price of it is. It's still how many gallons of gas people are utilizing. That's where we're getting our revenue from.
And I've mentioned all these things about inflation, but if you guys have gone to the pump lately, gas prices have come down a little bit. So I guess it's anyone's guess. If I had my crystal ball and could exactly hit what inflation would be the next couple of years, I probably wouldn't be here. I would probably be making a lot of money somewhere, but anyway, so obviously we monitor closely. We don't see any drastic changes for 22, 23 or 24 with the Michigan transportation funds. If things change, obviously we would communicate that to the board. And, you know, when we talk about our projections for 23 and 24, those are just that, projections that make sense right now, but it could change tomorrow. And that's why we emphasize that these are just a look ahead as of this point in time. And we don't necessarily say, oh, that's our budgets for the next 2 years. They're very dynamic and ever changing.
So have we had any revelations about the electric vehicle impact on consumption of fuel?
We have not.
Okay.
I did hear some things out of Lansing as far as maybe the taxing mechanism needs to change as there are more electric vehicles that are being introduced. The what they call the CAFE standards, which is, you know, when new vehicles are manufactured, they need to have a certain level of per mile gas that they get. You know, that continues to increase as well. So definitely it creates some challenges. And again, we've not seen that full impact yet, but you know, it would be good if Lansing were proactive with that. So as you see more electric vehicles introduced, that, you know, the taxing mechanism will match that. And so our Michigan transportation funds, you know, are not halved at some point, or, you know, what would we do at that point?
So are the finance directors, and I would assume managing directors too, are having conversations about this, or?
Know that that is a
CRA?
hot topic with CRA, and that's actually one of the things that is at least identified on the legislative priorities for CRA, and that is to continue, or maybe you could argue we haven't always had a stable funding mechanism with respect to transportation infrastructure. At the end of the day, the road really doesn't care what type of vehicle is traveling on it or how it's powered. It's from our perspective, it's the same piece of infrastructure that we need to take care of, but clearly how we are financed is of huge importance to us. And I know of the events I've attended recently, that's certainly been a topic of discussion with CRA, is making sure that as more and more electric vehicles come online, that there is some form of mechanism where we're capturing that lost revenue, because even with the increased vehicle registration fees for electric vehicles, that's not keeping up with the loss in revenue due to the, you know, the decline in the fuel consumption.
And there are some more forward-thinking states out there. I want to say it was either Washington State or Oregon that had a pilot program where basically they would tax you based on miles driven. If it's during congestion, then maybe you would be taxed slightly higher. You know, but the challenge with that is there had to be a device in your vehicle that would track every place you go. And so it was met with lots of resistance, but, you know, that's really the way to do it. You know, kind of monitor what roads do you drive on, primary roads, local roads, highways, and then you're taxed accordingly. It seems like that makes the most sense to me. And then, you know, the argument about electric vehicles and all that, you know, it's just more based on the miles driven. So, you know, there are some pilot programs out there that Lansing can use as examples to address, you know, the potential shortfall. You know, it's a good thing, right, that we're getting more gas miles per gallon from our vehicles, and, you know, it's good for the environment and so on. But, you know, it could potentially be, you know, not sustainable if it continues to go in that direction as far as the impact on our revenues, but we're not seeing it in the short term.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Green.
is there any suggestion that a continued inflation will impact our township participation?
Township participation, as you'll see in one of our slides here that we'll get to in a minute, they continue to make some significant investments in their local roads. If anything, I've seen an increase. So Not heard anything as far as from the township saying, oh, with inflationary costs, we can't afford to continue to invest in the roads. So I've not heard anything, being talked about as far as, well, geez, our costs for other things are going so high that we have to, disinvest in the roads. In my opinion, and Cheryl and Adam probably are closer to it, it continues to be a high priority for the townships. So I don't know.
Yeah, this year, certainly, we've seen a high level of investment. We are incredibly grateful to our township partners. I do think if these trends continue, certainly their buying power, our buying power is going to not nearly go as far. And we're going to we're already examining our costs for next year. And that may be where, I don't know that we're going to see less participation out of the townships, but certainly their ability, if the funding levels remain consistent, the amount of work that could be done is going to decrease simply because the cost of us doing business between fuel and the material costs that we're experiencing will certainly go up next year.
And I'll say this several times, but we run a conservative budget. So when we look at the out years 23 and 24, we take our township agreement program down to really a minimum, and you'll see we have a huge an increase to it. But conservatively, when we look at those out years, we'll have it at a base level. So if the townships were to decide to not invest in the roads as much as they had in other years, we would be fine from a budget perspective, or we would kind of already have those numbers in there. So usually the second quarter is when we adjust it based on, we've got all the agreements back, we kind of know the work level and so on. And so we make that adjustment.
That answer your question.
Thank you.
You're good. Anything, Joanne? No.
So again, continuing to talk about inflation just a little longer. We do see an impact in material and project costs. We've had to adjust some of our projects. Material, we're a consumer as well as far as fuel and so on. You'll see an adjustment there. And there's also lead time problems as far as, staff really having to plan ahead as far as, ordering materials and so on, because supply chain challenges. I mean, all these things I've not really seen in my 27 years. So it's, as Cheryl mentioned, it's been a most unusual year, but we feel like we're still in good shape. It just, maybe we have to sharpen our pencils a little more, or be even more proactive when we're ordering things and so on, or our bid documents. I know we're looking at those things as well. But all in all, we're trying to manage through all this as best we can. And as it says there, we'll continue to monitor and plan, and if inflation continues to increase, well, maybe we have to make some more adjustments, but we'll be ready if we need to. So any other questions on that?
I don't see any.
Okay, next slide. Township revenues, Commissioner Green, very timely with your question. We've actually have seen a significant investment yet again, which is awesome. So kudos to Adam and his crew. So we are actually increasing the revenues from the township agreement program by $5 million. So the total program is about $8 million. Was trying to just look at a bit of history. I don't think that's the highest investment we've ever seen, but it's probably in the top 5. So, that's awesome that the townships believe in what we're doing. It certainly is a priority for their residents, and we can accomplish a lot of work on the local roads for $8 million.
Is any of that ARPA money? Do you know?
As far as I know, it is not. I don't know,
Oh.
Cheryl, have you heard that? Yeah.
If it is, they have not shared that with us. Again, our
Okay.
agreement just is that they're going to pay us. So
Right. I thought maybe conversationally, they would say we had this windfall and Treasury decided we could
Yes.
spend it this way.
several townships have inquired about specific projects and indicated they wanted to fund, or with ARPA, for example, a culvert replacement, I know is something that Ann Arbor Township is entertaining and has
Mhm.
indicated they'd be using their ARPA funds for that if they move forward, but I have not heard
Interesting.
anything with respect to
Okay.
ARPA on these.
Speaks highly of the trust that's been cultivated by this organization with the townships, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, we have to do the work too, so there would be a corresponding increase in expenditures as well. So.
Okay.
Next slide. As far as our federal state funds, met with engineering and the US 12 M17 project in Ypsi Township. We looked at our budget for this year and we decided we needed to increase that by 340,000. So we're increasing the revenues as well as the expenditures on that. So the total project now is about $8 million. So definitely a huge project. I think hopefully this is the last year for it. So maybe some minor items next year, but you know, it's been a pretty successful project. So yes.
Yes, so if you can help me understand, I thought the project was 8 million to begin with.
Right. So, but our, you know, that's just, I think the money that was secured. But, you know, it could be 7.5, it could be 8.5. We don't necessarily know until we get into it, but it looks like they're going to hit it pretty close to the 8 million.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question or, no? Okay.
Any other questions on this? Okay, next slide.
Is that project substantially completed?
I believe it is. Brent, I don't know if you have any.
There is work to be done still on it. The signal poles. Go ahead.
Yeah, the signal poles need to be, we're still waiting for the orders for those. So once those are received, then that'll kind of complete that portion of the project. But most
And I think there were a
others-
couple other items that, again, the township was, we were all conservative to make sure we were going to come in under budget. And then we met with the township and they were the ones who made the determination of bringing things back into the project that originally had been sort of put on hold until we saw where the budget fell. And I think there was a couple of landscaping items and additional things they're adding back in. I don't know if Matt can speak to that or not.
How old is this project?
I certainly can, if you'd like.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michelle Ford is working very closely with the township and OHM advisors who's managing this project on our behalf. Ultimately, they added some additional sidewalk, some additional fence screening, but as Brent indicated and Cheryl, we are waiting on those mast arms. That is a significant cost that we're going to see here shortly. Once they are installed, we'll be paying on those items and hopefully wrapping up construction this fall. So that's the hope. But again, we're subject to that major delay in steel fabrication for those steel mast arms.
Did you have any other questions associated with that project? I know there, along the way there were, right? There was, wasn't there signage and landscaping questions along, those have
Well,
been resolved? or-
it was a question about the bioswale that may not have been finished or something.
Seems to me that it was early. The plantings looked kind of scrawny in the beginning, right? Until they take root and take off. If nothing's bubbling up for you, then.
Yeah, Matt, I don't know if you want to address some of the landscaping, and I know there was some discussion around the drainage around the tree.
Yes.
Yeah, so certainly that is been added as far as additional plantings. I'm not sure if those all have been completed as of yet, but I can certainly report back. Michelle's working very closely with the township, and all those decisions are ultimately the township's to make as far as what plantings, because they have to maintain all those plantings after the fact. And once we're done with the contract, the road commission is not going to be part of any further conversations because it's ultimately MDOT's road, and there's an agreement in place between MDOT and the township for future maintenance of these facilities.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay, we'll go to the next slide then. So other contributions, our county millage, here in River Drive, I believe that's north of Brass Creek to North Territorial, is that
Correct.
correct? Just to give you the exact location. That was initially planned for 2023. But for a variety of reasons, we were trying to advance that into 2022. And so by doing so, we would need to add $1 million to our revenues from the county millage and then corresponding expenditure. I've reached out to the county treasurer's office. Timing's everything, right? So, you know, it's based on the winter taxes that are collected, but a large portion is collected in, say, December of this year. So can we recognize that revenue in 2022, or do we have to wait till early 2023? Even if we have to wait till 2023, the only thing that could potentially cause is cash flow problems, but I'm not worried about that. You know, $1 million, the road commission could handle that for several months. But I'm hopeful that that money, if it's available, that we can receive that money in say December of this year and then recognize it in this budget year. Otherwise, we would show, you know, an additional decrease to our fund balance of $1 million. And after I receive an answer from the county treasurer's office as far as the timing, I want to reach out to our auditors as well to make sure that, you know, that it's still, even though it's considered 2023 millage money, can I still recognize that in 2022? So, you know, I'm not too concerned again, if we can't recognize that until next year, it would just show maybe a little more deficit spending, but obviously we would receive that in early 2023. So that was kind of a lot there. I don't know if there's any other questions. Or Cheryl, I think you wanted.
Well, I was
maybe
just
add
going to
something.
explain briefly, the reason for pushing this project up. I mean, for the most part, we try to honor the millage in the years in which the work is assigned. But in this particular case here in River Drive, we had to close it for an extended period of time this past spring because of the fact that it was literally breaking up to the point where we could not safely maintain that roadway. We were able to, once things dried out, patch it back together, but we have concerns that it won't make it through next spring. So we have reached out to our contractor and they do have capacity to put this project into this fall's schedule if we need it to go in. So that was the reason behind it. If we can make it work from a cash flow perspective, it looks like we should be able to make it from a construction perspective. And I think that that'll benefit everyone and hopefully, fingers crossed, then we won't be closing the road next spring, which is what we were forced to do earlier this year.
Commissioner Gloria, Commissioner Yamas has a question.
Commissioner Yamas.
Thank you, Cheryl. That kind of answered some of my questions because I was a little confused. So you said that we could maintain that for a couple of months. So does that mean that the project would be later in 2022 so that we could handle that? And is it a matter of where that starts? Because the money wouldn't have to come right away, right? The project, we pay as you go, as things are getting done. Is that correct?
Correct. We would pay as costs are incurred as far as the project goes. That is correct. The intent would be to construct it this fall. So we would potentially have expenditures in late 2022. Dan's hopeful that we'll be able to get that revenue in still at the very end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023 when we can still recognize it in 22. If not, we would look like we have additional deficit spending, but we would be able to pay for it early in 2023. So we can handle it from a cash flow perspective. Some of it becomes just an accounting issue.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Yamas?
Yes, thank you.
And, you know, I'm the one that needs to worry about the accounting issues, but they are important. You know, if we count on things a certain way and our auditors say, no, you know, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I'd rather have those conversations now than when they're out here doing the audit and then it's a surprise. So.
Well, all of us need to be prepared to explain if we're doing deficit spending, why we're doing deficit
Right.
spending. So
Yeah.
even if it's an accounting type issue, I think that we all need to be prepared to have an answer for that.
And our audit is one of the first, right, that get done in the new year. So
That's
having these
correct.
conversations early is
Yes.
important.
Yeah, you know, I try to leave no surprises with the auditors. So if there is anything unusual, have those conversations now. Especially because sometimes they may have to do research, we may have to do research, but I've always found it best to not wait. And, you know, we have the relationship that I can feel free to contact them at any time to receive their guidance. You know, there are new GASB pronouncements that come along all the time. And so we again talk about those things well in advance of the audit. So again, we're not surprised that we're prepared. We're on the same page. It's just, you know, it's just good to have the lines of communication open. So, okay, any other questions?
I don't see any further questions.
Okay, next slide. Miscellaneous contributions. So we are planning on financing 4 of our heavy trucks for this year using installment purchases, which we've done in the past. And that's about $960,000. Unfortunately, again, here's another supply chain issue. We actually have 11 trucks that we had budgeted for this year that we're being told will not be received until next year. So we need to make sure that we acknowledge that we carry over the funds into next year. So we need to decrease the proceeds from the installment purchases for the 4 heavy trucks, and that will be carried over into 2023. And then we have about $2.3 million a fund balance that we'll need to carry over. That's the price of all 11 trucks minus the proceeds from the installment purchase. We need to carry all that over to 2023 as well to make sure that we don't go into that budget as far as the equipment. I know Adam's been working closely with the vendors. You know, we try to have a lot of lead time as far as when we order our trucks, but there's just, you know, a lot of challenges right now in everything. So definitely you can imagine getting trucks road ready. There's a lot to that. And so that, you know, they're experiencing similar supply chain issues.
Seems to me in the past, what was it, an 18-month runway for placing an order and actually receiving the vehicle?
At least.
Even more so at this point.
Right.
This is an example of, and what staff would be intending to do again this year, of next month when we review our equipment and facilities with the board, we have benefited from, after that, actually authorizing ahead of time to the staff to go ahead on the equipment purchases, knowing that that would then be in the subsequent year's budget, but we've been trying to get ahead of the game or get first in line, so to speak. So these 11 trucks that Dan just mentioned, they were ordered in September of 2021. We will not be taking delivery until first quarter of 2023. So that did not work terribly. I mean, but we're so far ahead of the game. So our intent would be to do that again this year. We will present next month to you on equipment and facilities with a high likelihood that we would come in September asking for authorization, at least for some of the equipment purchases, to allow us to get in line.
Okay.
Will we be impacted by any increase in prices due to inflation?
I believe we enter into a purchase agreement at the time that we actually are placing those orders. So we are also, that's benefiting us because we're holding that cost at that time. Some of these were actually waiting on prices, not for these 11 trucks, but other pieces of equipment. We haven't even been allowed to place the order yet. They know we are interested. Our shop is doing a phenomenal job of trying to get us in line, but we haven't even gotten the invitation to get in line. And that is when we would get the pricing for the vehicle.
Yep. Yes.
Are we replacing or adding? Because that's a lot of trucks. Are we missing some trucks or what?
I would say a
Replacing.
little of both, or would you say more replacing?
No, that's replacing.
Yeah. And then some of the older vehicles that we have, we are selling at auction. And we've been getting some really good pricing for that. It's just, again, it's just such a weird dynamic in the world. You know, used cars are getting, you know, almost as much as new cars. So, yeah, it's just very strange what's going on. But yeah, any auction proceeds then we'll also use towards the purchases of these trucks as well. And I can remember a lot of times the first board meeting of the year in January, we would have for the boards, you know, the bids for road equipment, and we would place orders then, but then we weren't getting them until the next year. So we bumped it up, and now we're still running into that issue. So not sure when that will end, or, you know, will it get worse? But again, that's where our staff's having to do more planning and just, you know, more look aheads. We want to make sure again that we're carrying money over and what year was that from? So it's getting quite involved, but staff is trying to stay on top of it as best we can.
We have approximately 50 heavy trucks in our fleet. Ideally, they last about 10 years. So ideally, we'd like to be replacing 5 a year. We had dug ourselves a really, really big hole with respect to replacement where we were just grateful if we were doing 1 a year for a period of time. So we're hopeful that this 11 can get us sort of back on track so that those trucks are where we need them to be and we can get into a sustainable replacement schedule. So ideally, you would be seeing 5 trucks a year plus other pieces of equipment as needed come through on the budget. Adam, am I getting a head nod? Okay.
Yeah, we had vehicles with holes in the floorboard.
Oh, yeah.
Because we weren't as planful as we would have preferred to be, right?
Correct.
And it kind of got that back.
Yeah.
Our own asset management plan with respect to our fleet, kind of, so.
Oh, yeah, we'll have lots of discussion on this next month, but that's just heavy, and that's just our heavy trucks. Keep in mind, we also have other trucks, other vehicles, graders, things that we need as well. But that's just simply the heavy truck portion of our fleet.
And, we had some challenging economic times, 2008, 2009, that was challenging. Our Michigan transportation funds were stagnant for like 20 years until we finally received the increase in 2017. So, that also contributed to the fact that there wasn't a lot of capacity to invest in the fleet like we probably should have been. So, but
Yeah, I don't mean to imply it was negligence. It
No,
was
no,
just
no,
one of those
no.
things that
Nope.
reached a critical mass.
Right, exactly. Yep. So, and I think we've been doing a much better job with planning for that and getting good replacement programs in place and so on. So, and like Cheryl said, ideally we get into a spot where, we just replace the 4 or 5 oldest trucks and we get into a nice system there. So.
Anything?
Nothing.
No. Sometimes I see movement out of the corner of my eye. So I apologize if I'm like, did you have a question? I just don't want to overlook you.
Sure.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Next slide, please. Talking inflation again, met with the operations team and looked at trends, looked at comparisons to the previous year, also trying to estimate utilization for the rest of the year, and decided we should make some adjustments, primarily due to inflation. Diesel and unleaded fuel, probably no surprise there. But minor adjustments, but we want to make sure we can get to the finish line on that. And then also limestone, we wanted to increase that by about $50,000. Any questions on that? All right, next slide. One increase for non-departmental, if the board recalls, we made some changes as far as employee contributions to pension, reduced that slightly. And with that reduction, then the employer would pick up that cost. And again, this is for non-union employees only at this point, but we'll need to increase our contributions to pension by about $50,000. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide. So just to summarize Q2 2022, we are actually increasing the fund balance by about $2.6 million with all the adjustments. But keep in mind, 2.3 of that is the impact of the carryover of our road equipment, the 11 trucks. So, that now you're down to about $300,000 increase. And, we're just not spending it in 22, we'll be spending it hopefully in 2023. So with that 2.6 increase, that would leave us with 17 million projected fund balance in 2022, which is about 20% of expenditures. And, I think it's a good spot to be in. I say this a lot too. We run a conservative budget, so we fully believe our numbers will come in better than we're projecting right now. But, I feel like the road commission is in a good spot financially as of the end of 2022.
And that 20% is well within the range that Plant
Within the
Moran
range,
recommends
that's
to
correct.
maintain.
Yes. Yep. So any other questions about 2022 at all? And before we get into 23 and 24, the next steps for the 2022 budget is the first meeting in August. We would have the second quarter budget and all the adjustments on the agenda for approval. If there's any changes in those numbers from what we've shared today to that first meeting, we would definitely cover those with you. But then we would put that on the agenda for approval, and we would make the adjustments accordingly. Okay, any other questions about 2022? Okay, so we'll get our crystal ball out and we'll talk about 2023 and 2024. So there's a lot of things that staff has to consider when we're looking at the out years. Again, stressing to the board, this is just a snapshot in time. I barely know what I'm going to do tomorrow as opposed to in October of 2024.
And Post-it notes, Dan.
Exactly, right, exactly. So, you know, with all the knowns that we have, and there's a lot of unknowns, especially the further out you go.
Right.
We just make educated guesses as best we can with all the information that we have. As I stated previously, we're using the MTF assumptions, slightly ratcheted down, not much, but and they are showing a slight increases in 23 and 24. So at least MDOT is convinced that, again, as at this point in time, that inflation is not going to adversely impact the Michigan transportation funds. So they do have those increases in there, which is great to see. It could change, but we kind of use their numbers for our out year projections, which kind of makes sense. And we want to be consistent with everything that we're doing. But they do show increases in the out years, so which is great. We want to make sure that we have all of our pension and OPEB obligations included in the out years as much as we can, including extra payments. We've made commitments to our employees and retirees. We want to honor those commitments. And I think the fact that those are in those budgets for 23 and 24, it demonstrates that the Road Commission is serious about our commitments to the employees and retirees.
And is there a horizon out there, Dan, where we achieve full funding? Another crystal
Probably,
ball projection,
right?
right?
I mean, so, you know, 2021 was a great year for the stock market, right? So our investment returns were great. And then the bottom kind of fell out this year. So, you know, we're not sure what the markets will continue to do for us. You know, probably not by 2024. You know, we're I want to say our OPEB's about 69% funded and our pension's about 57% funded, which seems like we're close, but you know, there's a lot to kind of move the needle. A lot of things need to fall into place.
Yeah.
So, you know, certainly I can't make the 100% funded projection, but you know, as long as we can continue to trend towards that, I think we're doing good. But yeah, I wouldn't say we'd be fully funded in the next couple of years. I mean, I would be delighted if we were, but we'll continue to address the unfunded situation as best we can, again, with all the competing needs that the Road Commission has. So.
Commissioner Green.
There always seems to be continued discussion about suspending the gas tax, either on the federal level or the state level. I keep hearing that over and over. Is that part of your projections in terms of the budget?
So again, we're using what MDOT is using. We do not have any projected gas tax holidays included. The federal gas tax, if there was something done at the federal level, I imagine it could potentially impact some out year projects, which then we would have to go in and look at what projects we were projecting, you know, to work on with federal and state funds. I've also heard at the state level, if there was going to be a gas tax holiday, that there was funding elsewhere that would supplement any loss from that, so that, you know, road commissions in theory would be made whole. So there's just so many unknowns with that. You know, if that became a reality, then obviously maybe some of our numbers would change. But and I imagine it would start probably from MDOT if they said, okay, there's a state gas tax holiday, then I imagine the MDOT folks would submit new projections for us to utilize. So obviously we're plugged in with all that and we would make some changes, but at this point in time, we've not really had an impact. We've not really included anything like that in the budget.
Thank you.
Commissioners, oh,
Fuller. Commissioner Yamas has a question.
thanks.
Okay, my apologies, Commissioner Yamas. I can't see when you're raising your hand or anything, so
Okay.
go ahead.
So I was like quickly trying to take notes. You said our pension is, you said our OPEB obligation is about 69% funded and our pension, I missed that number, is,
57.
okay, thank you.
Yep, sure, no problem.
And we've been putting in what, $500,000 extra?
Approximately, yes, on
For the
top
past-
of the monthly invoices we receive from MERS.
Right. And how many years
Yes.
have we been doing that? Quite a few.
I want to say maybe half a dozen years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it hasn't been entirely consistent from year to year, but you know, we've tried to put anywhere between 300,000 to 500,000 additional into that to address our unfunded levels. So.
Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question, Commissioner Yamas?
Yes, because I noticed just since I've been on the board that we've increased that little by little by little. And I just wanted to put it on my notes. Thank you.
Yep. So again, when we look at the out years, we have all these competing needs. We want to make sure, obviously, we budget for our county millage projects, which, you know, some of those estimates were created several years ago. So we've had to dial those in a little bit, especially I think the seal coat projects, right? We've had to increase some of the numbers
Both the
there.
paving and the seal
Yeah.
coat, correct?
Right. And then also looking at our federal state aid projects that we receive funding for, we want to make sure we incorporate all those as best we can. And then obviously the further out we get in 2024, there's some unknowns as far as, you know, what grants we might be receiving. So again, we just take what we know now and make sure that all that is in the budget. We did have to make a change with our capital road equipment budget. Typically, we put about $4 million each year. We've actually reduced that to $2 million. Again, these are just projections. If our numbers and our patterns and our history come into play, that with our conservative nature, we should come out better in this year, which means then we can look at the capital road equipment budget, maybe increase that for, you know, our initial 2023 budget or even in the first quarter. So that is our hope that, you know, our numbers will come in better and anything that we've reduced, maybe we can restore to traditional levels. So any questions on that at all? Okay, next slide. Talk inflation again. We always put inflationary costs in our departmental budgets for wages, for materials and so on. Maybe even ratchet that up a little more for some of the material costs that we're seeing. Definitely inflation we do feel is impacting some projects in the out years. We wanted to make sure that we had those costs in there. We don't want any surprises. So, you know, we want to at least make those adjustments right now instead of waiting until it's too late, really. Also exciting news, we do have the construction of the Yard 1 salt barn in our 2023 budget. That's been, I've been here 27 years. We've probably been talking about that for 27 years on and off. So exciting to have that in our budget and really looking forward to, you know, that work occurring next year. So that would be great.
Are we seeing any competition in the bidding process? My concern is that we get into this dynamic of to the highest bidder goes. And I'm just wondering if that's started.
We continue to try to be creative in how we bid things so that if we feel that we're not getting favorable bids, we may look to extending our dates for completion, allow construction to start taking place next year in 2023, hoping that that would give us additional contractors that may have capacity in their schedule. So if several contractors are full this year and they're not bidding, and then, you know, others know that prices go up. So that's when we would say, okay, well, we'll give you to start looking at the 23 schedules, those types of things. So we're trying to be as creative as possible, but across the board, we absolutely are seeing inflationary indications, and it doesn't matter whether it's contractor pricing, asphalt, concreting, the work that would be done. Bridges are particularly expensive these days. But we are seeing it, whether it's limestone, any of the materials that are being delivered, for our own direct force work as well. We're seeing fuel surcharges and various things as everyone is trying to adapt, to this new economy, supply chain issues, and then just general inflationary costs. So we're trying to not scare anybody, but we're also trying to take it into consideration as we're looking at next year.
And it seems like in the past, we've had some bids come in really high, so we've just said, no, thank you. We're gonna
Right?
Yep.
Sure.
rebid that another
And
time.
we may do that as well as we start bidding projects or services even for next year.
Yep, so definitely it's made the bidding process a lot more challenging. We're having to be more proactive and think outside the box. I know, talking to our peers, what are you folks doing?
Mhm.
All that's kind of coming into play. So,
Do you take into consideration weather projections as when you start thinking about the fall and winter needs?
weather projections?
Yeah, I'm just
Uh,
curious.
Yeah, yep. So again, conservatively, we would assume like a worst case scenario with regards to winter. So we want to make sure that we have all that in the budget. So again, we have the Veterans Day snowstorm that we had, what was it, last year or 2 years ago? That the budget can cover that. You never know, right? So we want to make sure that we're as close to a worst case scenario for those type of events as possible. And within reason, I mean, we don't want to have, an epic storm that we've never seen before, but closer to the worst case scenario, so that we have enough for like salt and wages for overtime and so on. So we do look at those type of things. Does that answer your question? Or
Absolutely.
okay. Any other questions on this slide? Okay, next slide. So what do all the numbers mean for the out year? For 2023, we do have projected deficit spending of about 7.8 million. And in 2024, deficit spending of about 4.8 million, which would leave us with a fund balance of about 4.8 million at the end of 2024. Commissioner Fuller, I know you'll probably ask the percentage of expenditures, and that's about 4%, which certainly is on the lean side. Again, would I like to see that 4.8 million in fund balance double or triple? I would, but there's a lot of work we want to accomplish. Staff, we all met as a team, with Cheryl and operations and engineering, and, tried to look at, the most important things that, we want to spend our funds on. And, I think everybody had to make some sacrifices here and there. But we also want to present something to the board that you would feel at least somewhat comfortable with. If that projected fund balance was a negative, which I think we projected, or we presented once or twice to the board with a negative fund balance, but we wanted to make sure that, that at least staff could feel comfortable about it. Again, this represents the worst case scenario. So I fully expect 2022 numbers to come in better. And certainly we'll know more for 23 and 24 as things progress. If things start looking worse, there are, maybe our capital equipment budget goes from 2 million to 1 million, or maybe our MTF overlay program has to be suspended. So, it doesn't lock us into a point where if things were to worsen, that the road commission would be like, oh geez, we're going to be out of money. So there are things, maybe if things were to worsen, maybe we can make that additional pension payment, or, there are areas there that if we had to, we could adjust. But just given all the competing needs, all the things that we want to accomplish the next couple of years, all the projects we have planned, that's what we came up with as far as the fund balance of 4.8 million.
Yeah, right now, I think it's important that we have a general blueprint of where we want to go over the next 2 years. So what this represents are commitment to the millage. I mean, we put that before the voters. Obviously, we need to complete that work. We
Right.
made a promise there. So this absolutely incorporates that. We've gotten in line for federal and state funds for the next couple of years with respect to, you know, the projects that are coming through Watts and some of the other grant programs that are out there. Obviously, that's leveraging our MTF with those federal and state funds, but we do have the portion that is ours, and we need to start design on some of those projects right now. In absolute worst case scenario, we can turn back some of that money if we absolutely had to, and that would save us at least the matching portion of those, but we need to start the design on those and hope, and again, this is very conservative, but expect that I have still a strong likelihood of being able to complete that work. Absolutely, we'll make the minimum payments necessary through MERS for both our OPEB and our pension, but again, right now, we're expecting this does include making those additional payments. If we are in a position where we can't do that, then we will forgo those additional payments. Same with some of the capital projects, whether they be for the equipment purchases or it be for some of the facility work. Some of that, if we have to either reduce or suspend, we can. So we have a game plan. If things get worse, we can actually tighten that belt. And yet, I think it's also important that we still attempt to accomplish a lot of this work because we are being conservative and would like to think we can still get a lot of this done. And we don't want to be completely surprised. Oh, look at this. We came out of it in a good position, but now we're not positioned to be able to do the next year's work either. So we're trying to find that fine balance.
Because, you know, I'm going to look at 20% of expenditures from
Right.
your 2022
Sure.
summary, dropping to 4%. So,
Yeah, that does not make anybody warm and fuzzy, but that again, that is 2 years away as
Right.
well.
right. I'm
So
sorry.
now we are required, if I'm incorrect, to keep the pension funded as close to 60% as possible. Is that right or wrong?
The pension program,
Pension balance.
the pension.
Yeah.
So Public Act 102, I think, I don't know, 152.
I was gonna say
There's a Public
152.
Act 152 where we have to submit our information each year to the state of Michigan, and they determine if we're funded adequately or considered underfunded.
Right.
And for a pension, it is 60%, and if you're below 60%, and unfortunately, there's different guidelines with counties compared to road commissions, but if we're below 60% by the state of Michigan, we're considered underfunded. Then we have to submit a waiver about, you know, well, what the state wants to know what plans we have as far as getting over that 60%. And we're at 57%, so we're close.
Yeah.
And each year our waiver has been accepted by the state. The state feels comfortable that we are addressing our underfunded needs. You know, it's a marathon, not a sprint with this. So, and I fully expect, we've submitted our initial, I think it's PA 102.
202. 202.
Is it 202? Okay. We've submitted our initial information to the state. I fully expect our OPEB will be fine. Our pension will be considered underfunded, and then we'll have to go through the waiver process. And I do anticipate that will be accepted yet again, because, you know, I keep hearing that, you know, the fact we're below 60%, but I think other municipalities are struggling even a lot more than we are with it. So, and I've never heard concerns from the state of Michigan, from our auditors, as far as our pension funded level or MERS. So I guess I'm not concerned from that standpoint, but it is nice. Hopefully we can continue to make some positive grounds on that.
Yeah, as a MERS participant, we are going to be required to make a certain level of payment. And as we should. I mean, this is a commitment to our employees, both active and for our retirees, that we are funding those things. So we are going to have to participate in that. We don't have to go over and beyond, but that's been the decision that this board, for the most part, has been able to, again, make confidently that we can afford that and try to get ahead so that we aren't just treading water, but that we're actually making progress on getting towards being fully funded for both OPEB and for the pension.
And Commissioner Green, I think you really run into problems when MERS sends their monthly invoice to you, to an agency, and the agency doesn't pay it, and they send it again. And at some point they'll say, you know, here's the rest of the money you have with us. Have a nice day. And I know that's happened to at least one municipality, and definitely we are able to make those monthly payments. It's just that over and above amount if we get into a situation that maybe we can't justify making those payments, then maybe for a year, then we would hold off.
But we'd still make the minimum
But we'd still
required
make those
payment.
monthly payments, absolutely. I mean, it would
Right.
be fiscally irresponsible for us to not include that, or it would be, our Michigan Transportation Funds have been halved, and, what are we gonna do? But, and, you guys have been around for a while, our trend and our pattern with our conservative budgeting, that usually the opposite is happening, that we end up in a better fiscal spot at the end of the year, that we're able to restore some of these things that we've had to reduce.
And this public act came to be because there were a lot of entities that weren't meeting their minimum obligations, right? And suddenly the
Yeah.
state is saying, you need to tell us, you need to report.
Mhm.
That's just since I've been on the board.
Yeah, and there were some municipalities that filed for bankruptcy, which was unprecedented. And so I think the state of Michigan said, okay, let's try and be a little proactive on it. If municipalities don't meet their requirements and they don't have a plan, or they're funded at, say, 10%, then potentially the state could assign folks from the state treasury office to sit down with that municipality and help them with a plan to climb out of the hole they've dug. So I think that's part of it too, is the state maybe would step in and help. If it's a situation that they determine this is unsustainable going forward.
I'm assuming they could take it over.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure like what degree, but emergency managers, obviously that was used in the past as well. So I think it could potentially be a situation like that.
Just curious. Yeah, thank you for your response.
Yeah, sure.
And we never want to find ourselves in that situation.
And the waiver isn't a forgiveness. It's you have a plan and we believe you'll honor it. So we'll give you a pass this year for being under 60%.
Correct.
Yeah, right. So, I think it's important with any unfunded liability that an agency doesn't put their head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. We know there are some challenges, but we do have a plan, and again, we're fiscally restrained a little bit as far as what we can do as an agency, but I think with all the competing needs, we're doing the best we can to try to address all of this. So.
Mhm.
Any other questions on this slide at all? Okay, next slide. Any other questions?
I don't have any additional ones. Commissioner Yamas, do you have any questions? No. All right.
Before we move on, I just would like to acknowledge a few folks. I'd like to acknowledge Adam and the operations leadership team. We had some very good discussions going over a lot of numbers, and they always take a different approach to the budget than I do, and hopefully we end up in the same spot. But if not, we have some homework to do. But just really great to work with the operations folks, and I think we have a good process going. And also Brent and Matt and the engineering leadership team also had some very good, thoughtful discussions as far as projects and what their budgets are looking like. And I think we have a really good system in place, not only for this year but the out years. And it's definitely a lot of work on everyone's parts to pull all this together, and it's a lot to pull together. So I just appreciate all their assistance. And lastly, Emily Kaiser's been great to work with. She's really
Document's
helped
amazing.
revamp our budget to make it look more professional and more readable.
Yeah.
And she is just great to work with. She can motivate me sometimes to, hey, I really need some numbers from you. The executive summary is something where her and I work on together, and she just really helps. A lot of times I will talk and she will take my words and make it into a nice executive summary. And, but her and her team have just been great to work with. There's a lot to our new budget format, but we have good processes in place to make it manageable. So just want to acknowledge those folks.
I appreciate you
Good
giving credit where credit is due, Dan.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's very much a collaborative effort.
It is. It's a team effort, and it
Yes.
has to be, right?
Yes.
It has to be ultimately, hopefully everybody feels good about it and buys into it. We may not agree with every single thing that is in there, but hopefully everybody feels their words were heard and their interests and concerns were addressed one way or another, and that everybody feels good about the end product.
Well, I really commend staff. I really think that they do attempt to be, fiscally responsible in the decisions that they're making. And I've asked all of them to put in there what they think they need, understanding that things may be cut. We just ideally hope that we're using a scalpel and not a machete as we're
Right.
going through on doing the cuts. So right now, that is where we're at. We hope that we're in a position of putting things back in the future and not doing additional cuts. But we're, again, trying to find that balance right now. But staff was very good about working together with each other in order to help assign those priorities.
Very good.
Any other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. And as I mentioned before, the next step in this process will be the next board meeting. We'll have the second quarter budget on the board agenda, and any changes, we'll communicate that. If there are no changes, we'll state that as well, and then we would just ask for the board's approval.
And then we'll talk about equipment and facilities at the working session in August. And then we'll talk about 2023 at the working session in November, with intent for approval of our 23 budget in December.
And we try and get that out of the way the first meeting in December, because we never know what December is going to throw at us weather-wise.
Right, and that's
Or
the-
COVID, or, right?
that's the main thing, is the road commission needs to have an approved budget prior to January 1 in order to open the doors technically.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. All right. We're due to take a brief break. Let's stretch our legs, get a drink of water if you need to, and come back by 10:15 at the latest. Welcome back. It is now 10:16 a.m. We've had our brief break, and we will dive right into the County Road Association's draft legislative priorities. Cheryl, do you have any introductory remarks you want to make?
I will just briefly run through how this process works. So each year, the County Road Association establishes legislative priorities. And they do that by starting, like they have this year, by sending out what they're proposing as the draft priorities for the next year, so for 2023. So we now have them before our board to discuss, and I'm assuming other road commissions are doing similar things. Then at your next council meeting, so we're part of the Southeast Council for CRA, and our next council meeting is on August 1st. So if you are planning to attend, please let Aaron know. Little side note there. But at that meeting, we will be discussing collectively with our council the legislative priorities. So if there are any changes, additions, deletions, anything that we want with respect to this draft document, that is the time and place to bring it up as far as Washtenaw County Road Commission through our Southeast Council. Then collectively, we decide if that's what we want coming out of Southeast Council. That is then incorporated into the documents, the different councils. Over time, we will see various versions of this, and you may see it gets to be color coded with respect to changes by the different councils that are proposed. Obviously, sometimes there's different priorities based on sometimes your geographic location. Things like logging is very important. Some of the impacts of snowmobile traffic, that's obviously felt in other areas of the state more so than for us. So you'll see different priorities established by the different councils, and then ultimately the General Policy Committee is going to make a recommendation to the CRA board, and then they will adopt formally the legislative priorities for 2023. So that's sort of how that process works. So we're early on in the process, but I thought it would be helpful to send this document out for all of you to take a look at and to see if there's anything that we, the Washtenaw County Road Commission, want to bring up at our Southeast Council meeting on August 1st. So I'll start by opening it up. There's questions.
Okay. Cheryl has distributed, and I believe Commissioner Yamas, you've gotten this via email, 2 suggested additions to the legislative priorities. Work zone safety, I want to start with that one. That was emphasized by Commissioner Doug Fuller. We've heard this, I believe at our last meeting, he spoke to this concern. And as a result, there is a proposed addition to the CRA legislative priorities, which we will present to the Southeast Council for incorporation, hopefully, into what we send up the food chain. So the work zone safety proposal, you can see for yourself here. I don't know whether that's something we can put up on the screens. I don't know who else is watching, if anyone. Oh, that's great. Right there is fine. So the Commissioner Doug Fuller actually had expressed a desire to have a law enforcement officer at each construction site, work zone outside the cities to actually monitor and enforce the reduced speed limits and people getting over into a lane if there's a shift that's required. And what we came up with was the suggestion that there be a work zone safety task force developed to address those concerns about how to better protect our workers in work zones. Any discussion on that proposal? Support or objection to that?
I think there's obvious support for this. I mean, work safety has got to be a number one priority for not simply the road commission, but the state of Michigan.
Certainly.
I think it's very good. It makes me think of the, I read something in the packet about there was having challenges of people going through the construction area. Would this apply to that?
Well, this is only asking that a task force be developed statewide so that we'd have input from all the road agencies around the state on how to address this concern. But that was part of what prompted
Yeah.
the concern.
If I can build on at
Please.
least some of the conversations I've had with Commissioner Doug Fuller, certainly that is one of the concerns. We see intrusion into our work zones on a very regular basis. We are fortunate on some of our bigger projects, especially when projects are starting out, the sheriff's department or the local municipality, for example, Pittsfield Township, Northfield Township, both have their own police departments. They will assign an officer for brief periods of time to try to at least correct poor behavior in the beginning. But they can't sit there all day. We understand that it has been a very good relationship to date, but it would be ideal to have someone there and have the funding to be able to pay, to pay for that, to have them more present. And certainly when we're doing some of the maintenance work on behalf of the state of Michigan, it would be nice to have a state trooper that is present to also do some enforcement, whether it be the speeds through the work zones or work zone intrusion. There's a lot of violations that are taking place. So I think that's all encompassing, at least from our perspective. And it would be interesting to hear what some of our, fellow road agencies are experiencing as well. Commissioner Fuller, I do think Commissioner Yamas also has a question.
Commissioner Yamas. And then
So-
Commissioner Green, I believe, had a question or a comment.
Thank you for this well thought out document. I was wondering, as you make suggestions to the CRA or you bring things forth, would it be appropriate to have bullet points, i.e., I know that we have a good relationship, but saying, i.e., police presence, or because I know that funding is also an issue for all agencies and their police. I know that Doug Fuller, Commissioner Fuller, talked about even having a car just parked there. I don't know, how good that is, but I mean, if it said, i.e., police presence at any time, and suggested funding, maybe the fees and fines that came from that would go to funding this, or if that's beyond the scope of this, if this is adopted by the CRA, then they would talk about more of how that would happen or what the suggestions would be.
To respond to your comments, Commissioner Yamas, the last sentence in the introductory paragraph for this
Yeah.
proposed talks about securing the presence of law enforcement to ensure work zone safety is one possible intervention, albeit the reduced number of sworn officers. So it's been suggested that that's one remedy to consider. But again, asking that a task force be established to look at exactly what you've described as what's the financial impact, who and what would provide a car, an officer in a car, bigger, uglier, flashier lights. I don't know. But the concern is that the traveling public has developed a bit of a disregard for the safety of our workers because they're in a hurry. So.
Yeah. They become
So
callous.
I appreciate your comments, and certainly if this work zone safety task force is put together, there will be an opportunity for input such as what you've described.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner
Great,
Green.
great.
My only comment was that, and I know that the proposal already addresses it, but that there's some funding mechanism for making, for these proposals are nice. And I know that police presence does make an impact, but I also know that police presence costs money. So finding ways to fund this, I'm sure that'll be a top priority of this work task force.
A lot of this boils down to funding, yes?
So it all
Yeah.
takes money.
Yeah. Great. Commissioner McCollum, anything additional? No. Okay. So we're in a working session, so we're not actually taking a vote on any of this. Cheryl, tell me how this, if we have consensus about this as a priority and has value, do we just introduce this at the August 1st Southeast Council meeting, or how does that work?
If we reach consensus amongst the board today, my intent would be to forward this on to Scott Marillet, who is our general policy person from the
Okay.
Southeast Council, just to let him know that it's already on the agenda, but that these would be the thoughts of Washtenaw County going into that conversation, just to give him a little bit of a heads up and maybe help guide some of that conversation as well. But certainly we can further expand on this during the discussion portion of it, and perhaps that gets into the bullets that Commissioner Yamas had mentioned, that we can, describe that better during our council meeting.
My concern was we don't need a formal vote from this
Agreed.
board to take this to the council.
Agreed.
Got it. Okay. All right. The second proposed addition to the legislative priorities, the Michigan Vehicle Code Amendment. Cheryl, if you'd speak to that, since you're most familiar with the people who are saying, would you please put a 25-mile-per-hour sign in
I will do my
subdivision?
best. I'm sure that Brent Schlack can also
Oh,
help with this
certainly.
one
I
as
defer
well.
to you.
since
Who do you
this
want
is-
to speak to this?
I will start and I will let
Okay.
Brent add, since I know he'll have plenty to add to that as well. So in two specific areas of the Michigan Vehicle Code, we are required to work jointly with Michigan State Police in order to obtain what's called a traffic control order. And specifically that is in setting speed limits. And that is also on doing any type of parking restrictions, the no parking along the edge of the roadway. Again, getting to funding and staffing, ultimately state police has been difficult to work with in a timely manner. I don't think that they think this is not important. I think it really is a resource, shortage on their part. But when we have asked for requests with respect to review for a speed limit, it has taken months, if not years, to have that take place. And then in addition, we've had similar concerns or challenges when it comes to parking restrictions. One of the parking ones that comes to mind for me is that on Gulfside Road, there is a charter school along there just north of Ellsworth Road. And a lot of parents that are dropping off, picking up children who have decided that it's easier to sit along the edge of the roadway than it is to try to enter the parking and get into the queue and all of those things. So we had been approached by the school. We were supportive of posting for no parking. And it became incredibly problematic because we could not get state police out to review it. And ultimately ended up with a situation with a child being hit, with respect to a bad traffic situation that, we felt should have been handled differently. I know Brent just recently submitted for a review of a roadway to ask for a reduction in speed limit, and we don't know how long that will take. I don't know, Brent, if there's anything that you would like to add or could build upon with that.
Yeah, sure.
Who are you, please, for the
Brent
record?
Schlack, Assistant Director of Engineering, Washington County Road Commission. We've worked really well with the state police in the past and other agencies around the state. And the suggestion that Cheryl's put together, I think, is a good one. We've worked with state police and their legislative unit on modifications to the vehicle code in the past. And I personally sat on that committee. And so I think this is a good one. I think that, like Cheryl said, I don't believe that they don't believe this is important. I think they have other tasks that they're doing. And so this is just one that hasn't risen up to a priority for them in some aspect. I think they do get to it, just takes a long time. And I think that if we develop a task force, I believe it'll really help maybe have those communication lines open and understand the importance for our residents and for our county and other counties in the state.
One of the challenges for us is that I think it's really easy then to say, well, then just remove state police from the equation if they're holding up the process. But I don't think that is something that we want to have happen. I think that they frankly lend some credibility to the process that perhaps and are able to remove the entire process from some of the political realm that might be there. If it was just the road commission that was unilaterally establishing these traffic control orders. So I do think personally, and I know Brent and I have
Yeah, I
discussed it,
agree.
that it's important that state police remain in the process. So that's part of why I think it's important that there be a task force, because I think it's important to hear from state police, just what their challenges are. And we sort of don't want to lose control over this one either and have it just be, oh, that's easy, we'll just X out state police, because I don't think that that would be, a response that county road agencies would ultimately support.
Yeah, and I agree. Just to add to that, I think to keep things uniform, state police are they're looking statewide and looking at, all the different counties and all the different variables statewide. And, it's not just Washtenaw County, and to keep things uniform, I think it's important for them to be part of the process.
So it's my understanding that the task force will be looking at creative ways to speed up the review process.
Correct.
Yeah.
Although ultimately, I'm sure it'll quickly become a resource issue and right back to that funding question.
Okay.
Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, it's kind of off topic a little bit, but golf site used to be 25 miles an hour, and then they increased it to 45. So would this work there when the state has already looked at it and said it could be 45?
Brent, would you like to?
Yeah, so there was a traffic control order that was developed. So Cheryl can probably help with the history, but there was a board resolution passed by this board that reduced that speed artificially to 25. And then we went through a whole speed study with the Michigan State Police and the township. And that's where it was increased to 45 based on the data that was collected for Gulfside Road.
And that is exactly the process that we want to continue to have them involved in. And sometimes it involves raising a speed limit. In that particular case, it was set artificially low. But then when the board rescinded the policy, it actually technically went to basic speed law, which is safe and reasonable with a maximum speed of 55, which I don't think anybody was saying that's what they wanted either. That's where we needed to go in and do the speed study and work with state police and do the entire data collection so that we established a proper speed limit, being in this case 45. I know the one that Brent's working on right now is a section of Textile Road where we're talking about lowering the speed limit. It's currently 50 and we're looking at lower, or the request would be to lower it. And we feel that that could be supported.
Yes, we believe the data supports that, but we need input from the state police.
Well, having that school change, looking at it again, it sounds like they need to look at it again because the child was injured.
That was for parking and we
Oh,
did,
that was for
we
parking.
did
Okay.
ultimately get that resolved.
Oh, okay.
So, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, anything?
So this would be a statewide task force, right? Or countywide,
No,
Yes,
statewide.
statewide.
statewide? Okay, so how is it going to be determined which, who's going to be the municipal representative?
Well, I guess there's different ways of doing that. Steve Pori, who is the engineer who works for the County Road Association, also works for the Michigan Municipal League. So I believe that there's a good relationship there with MML in addition to CRA. So I would think that he would be a good starting point to see if there's any municipalities that would be interested in participating in this, as well as county road associations.
So I'm confused. I thought you said a resolution was passed by a road commission board that must have predated my tenure to lower a speed limit. I didn't think we had the authority to take such action. Did I understand? Do I have this figured out or am I
I'm sorry to
confused?
really cause some confusion, but based on state law, no, we don't have that authority. It has to be a three-party agreement.
Right.
And, but a previous board prior to your involvement with the board, unilaterally made that decision that they felt that they can make for Gulfside Road.
Okay.
It was in the mid 1990s and we had multiple roads that were basically illegally posted without appropriate traffic control orders. My predecessor, because I was originally hired in as the traffic and safety supervisor, my predecessor actually got the board to rescind all of those. And then she left. So that was actually one of the first things I got to deal with was trying
okay,
to
I
get
just
these
was
properly
confused.
Right,
established.
sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
So no, those were incorrectly posted. That was invalid. And we have again, thank you to Yvette Ware. She started that process, trying to get things correctly posted, making sure that we had validity to all of our speed limits that are out there.
And recently, we've had a lot of traffic control orders on our consent agendas, which is the housekeeping that you're describing, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that housekeeping then also relates to Michigan State Police because we do have a handful that we need to correct with them as far as language or, jurisdictions changed. And so we have those as well. And so it has to go through them and ultimately back through this board to get approved.
Okay, I just want the record to show that this board does not have the authority to establish or change speed limits on roads, correct?
That's correct.
Outside of cities.
Unilaterally, yeah,
Yeah, unilaterally, correct.
unilaterally.
Okay. It's not infrequent that we get these kinds of requests, and I just want there to be no confusion about.
Correct. It's a
that
three-party
works.
agreement based on the Michigan Vehicle Code. That includes our board, or our road commission, the township, and the state police. We all have to agree.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Anything else you want to speak to in terms of the vehicle code?
I don't think so. I don't know if Commissioner Yamas has any
Oh.
questions.
Commissioner Yamas, anything?
No, I guess I wanted to speak to Hewitt Road, but I don't think it's really kind of relevant. I know that a pedestrian was killed on Hewitt last year, the year before, trying to cross at a pedestrian crossing. I believe there's one there that you push the button and flashing lights come on. But the speed limit is so high. I don't know if that's been taken down or not because it doesn't really, well, they have some on Carpenter that work that cars get accustomed to and then stop so a pedestrian can cross. But it seems like very high in a residential area, but it is what it is, right? That's kind of sad when they don't match up. But I know that we followed, the road commission has followed the three-part process like that Cheryl described. And I learned that early on in this board about why the speed limits are what they are in different areas, that it's not an arbitrary thing, that it's careful consideration and we have to follow the laws and rules set forth. So really, it's all I had a
Right.
comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was a terrible situation, that took place. And there was a couple of different things that were going on there with respect to the pedestrian crossing. The crossing itself, we worked with the township and the community to find a better location for the crossing. Got the safety grant to be able to move the crossing and to further emphasize the crossing because it is a 45-mile-an-hour roadway. Obviously, there were questions with respect to the speed limit along there, which was understandable and pretty typical of when a situation like that happens, that would be the natural request that would come to this organization as well. But that is also a good example of, we reviewed all the data associated with that, and that roadway carries 20,000 vehicles a day. So it's not a residential road. So at 25 miles an hour is not appropriate along that roadway. So we're having to balance the need of all the motorists that are along there, the appropriate function of that roadway in our network. And then obviously a lot of concerns because there are pedestrians that are attempting to cross that roadway, and that they have a safe manner to be able to do that. But ultimately that speed limit is appropriately established.
Correct. And we did work with the county sheriff department and the community on determining the location, and they did speed patrols as well to help us gather all the data to determine what the proper location was and if that speed limit was set properly.
Good. All set, Gloria? Okay. Thank you, Brent. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yes, thank you.
So we then have a larger document. I didn't start with that because I didn't want people to be run down by the time we got to our two proposals there. Does anyone have anything within this legislative priorities document, which is almost 20 pages long, that they want to speak to or ask questions about? I don't feel the need to go page by page by page unless, commissioners, you have a desire to do that. We've had this for what, 6 weeks or so to go over. So I would hope that you've had a chance to go through, make notes, ask questions of Cheryl and or anyone else when you were unclear about the intent. I'm not seeing any concerns being raised. So I would expect that our managing director will forward these two proposals to the Southeast Council policy person, which is Scott Marilat.
That is
for
correct.
us. They will be then, I hope, under consideration on August 1st at our next Southeast Council meeting. I do plan to attend. And if the rest of you can if you haven't already, let Erin know whether to reserve a spot for you, because we do eat lunch and they have to have a head count.
Correct. I believe it's at Ingham County.
Yep. Yep, Ingham County, which is, the address is on Bush Road, I think it was.
In Mason.
Yep, in Mason. 301 Bush Street in Mason, Michigan. The coffee and rolls at 9, meeting calls to order at 9:30. We're good, I guess. Okay.
Okay.
Stop us, Gloria, if you have something you want to talk about. Okay, all right. Anything else that you wish to address today in this working session? No? All right. Seeing none, if I could entertain a motion to adjourn the working session, please.
So move.
Support.
Thank you. Emily, the roll, please.
Commissioner Rod Green,
Yes.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas is absent or she's here virtually, but is not able to vote as a virtual participant. Commissioner Joanne McCollum,
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas Fuller has an excused absence, and Commissioner Barb Fuller.
Yes, and I just want to point out that Gloria has made time in her schedule to be here virtually, but because of the Open Meetings Act, we can't consider her here as much as we'd like to. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you. See everyone at 1 o'clock.